Let's go ahead and get started by having today's expert introduce himself. Pat, would you take it away?
Of course. Thanks, Anastasia. And thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Pat Spring. I am the VP of Marketing here at Kiewit. So I've been here sitting in our Copenhagen office for the last 4 years and kind of working with the company here and also interacting with a lot of our customers and clients and seeing how they use our tool, and gives us a little bit of a unique perspective on how people have addressed Black Friday and some different trends that we see people going in. So we'll go over a little bit of that today, and hopefully we can provide some stuff that's going to be helpful to people both this year and into the future for everyone. So
nice. So just to give a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today, first we're going to take a look at the changing holiday season landscape. Additionally, we're going to be looking at why this year's landscape in particular favors an approach towards scarcity and hype building. We'll also be looking at 6 strategies that retailers can use in their holiday season sales. And then finally, as mentioned, we'll be ending with the Q&A. So, Pat, what can you say about the changing holiday season landscape? As far as I can remember, kind of growing up, Black Friday meant standing in a physical line after Thanksgiving Day, waiting until midnight for stores to open up and what have you. But things have really clearly changed since my younger days.
Yeah, same for me. And I think one of the things that's maybe not a huge surprise to people, but we're continuing to see e-commerce be a bigger and bigger role in Black Friday. And that, I think, accelerated, obviously, as we kind of went into the pandemic. And now that we're kind of, I don't want to say on the other side, but on the other side of it, we're still seeing e-commerce have a huge kind of uptick in how much people are using it and the traction that it's getting. Over the last couple of years, we analyzed within our customer base about 4 billion sessions. And I think between 2020 and 2021, we saw about a 57% increase in overall traffic coming into the website. And then the other thing that we saw is just a continued expansion of the holiday season. So of course, long ago, right? It was just Black Friday. That's when you had to be there for the deal. And we've kind of continued to see that go out to the week. And now at this point, we see it 25 days before, 25 days after, all the way up to Christmas. We see kind of different Black Friday deals. So it's continuing to expand. And then the last thing, maybe a little bit more specific to this year, we've also seen a lot of maybe consumer indications that we're going to see some low consumer confidence this year. So just because of inflation, supply chain issues, all of that kind of stuff culminating, it looks like we're going to have some challenges with that this year, which of course brings in its own, like if people have less budget to spend, Black Friday becomes more competitive, it becomes harder to get people's attention, et cetera. So I think all of that is kind of culminating, and that's what we'll see for 2022 this year. And then just to kind of reiterate some of the numbers that we talked about, this is from the study we did at the end of last year. But you can see at both the days leading up to Black Friday and the days leading after Black Friday, which is the kind of big spike right in the middle, there's continually been an increase in traffic on the days leading up to and the days leading up to Christmas, in between Black Friday and Christmas. And I think what we'll probably continue to see is a more kind of expansion of this pattern, especially as e-commerce takes a bigger role and we don't need to necessarily drive people into a physical location for a single day.
Interesting. So kind of keeping in mind all of these trends that we're seeing leading up to this year, what are some things that I think retailers need to consider in the build-up towards the holiday season then?
Yeah, so I think what we're all trying to do, or what we keep seeing, is how do we replicate effectively that feeling of being in a physical location, but doing it on a website or on a digital space, right?
Yeah.
Part of the reason is that, of course, digital is extremely scalable. You can reach a ton of people, but you do miss out a little bit on that like feeling of being in a physical space with a ton of people going after an in-demand item, and the energy and everything that goes into that event, which is kind of what used to make that Black Friday rush fun, right? And to do that on a website when you're sitting in a room by yourself isn't quite the same thing. So I think we're seeing people try and tap into this scarcity and hype model, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today, to try and drive or replicate that feeling. And then the other thing that's interesting about this tactic is that it also can be effective since that holiday season is expanding. It's like, how do I engage and drive hype in an effective way throughout the holiday season, not just on a single day?
Right.
And make sure that you kind of maintain interest over a longer period of time, instead of just kind of crossing your fingers and hope they show up. So So if you look at a little bit of one of the main reasons why we see people starting to adopt this tactic, a lot of it I think has to do with loyalty, right? So we'll focus on this a lot today, but loyalty is one of the things that we see. Of course, a lot of people are gonna kind of make a lot of their revenue from their loyal customers, the people that keep coming back again and again. But the main thing that I think we focus on this page, I guess the statistic I really want to point out, is that this bottom one, that people are 3 times more likely to recommend people to kind of shop or recommend a product if they're a loyal customer already, right? So developing those one-to-one relationships, creating that loyalty, and I think one of the things that we have seen happening a lot is people are using this scarcity and hype tactic to create or at least initiate that initial kind of loyalty and relationship with people. And that's why we've seen these shopping events and membership events and things like that start to take center stage, I mean, throughout the year. And I think it's going to become even more prominent as we get into Black Friday and the holiday season as well. And it's going to be a way that people try and get that attention from their loyal customer base, and then hopefully kind of pull new and potential new members, new loyal customers into that community. And so we're seeing tons of that. And I think the main reason, like, so one, there's interest, right? People are interested in these product drops. And I think in particular, people are interested in being able to potentially get access to something that has a limited supply or is difficult to obtain, like something, it's like there's this kind of almost inherent feeling to collect, right? Where I want to have something that maybe someone else doesn't, or that
we want to feel
obtain.
special. We want to have something that not everyone can get a hold of, right?
Yeah. And I think more and more we try and find ways to have the stuff that we own, like, mean something to us. And this is a way that it means something to us.
It says something about who we are, right?
Exactly. And the other thing that I think we see this kind of continuing to gain momentum is this last stat on here, which is that not only are people able to use this as a way to garner this interest in like the here and now, like I want people to come to my website and interact with me today, but it also, people that participate in these product drops have increased brand affinity. 67% have increased brand affinity.
That's interesting.
And that's that, not just the now, but the longer term kind of build of a community and loyal customer base and trying to get more at that space. So
yeah, that's really cool. So you touch on kind of, how it is that that brands can start kind of building loyalty through these product drops. What are some other strategies that they might be able to have in place in order to generate that kind of hype and ultimately deliver on the demand of their product drops?
Sure. So we'll kind of go through a progression of 6 of these.
Yeah.
But I think this first one is basically the base layer of the tactic, which is that you need to tap into scarcity marketing. Right. So I think we've all had some kind of interaction with the economics class at some point in our lives, hopefully.
Back in high school, yeah.
And just thinking about that super basic supply and demand curve, right? So as you take supply away, you create scarcity because there's more demand than there is supply. And essentially what you're trying to do is drive that so that there's a little bit of more or less like fear of missing out on being able to get this item, right? So I want to be the person that has this, and the only way that I can get this is by participating in XYZ, right?
Yeah, and it's a limited time only. Like this isn't going to last forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, and I think it drives a little bit of urgency in the relationship.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what we see happen when people are successful at that is, it drives traffic and interest, but on top of that, it drives like kind of a higher conversion all the way through your funnel. People interact with your communications more because they're interested and it's time sensitive. They're converting once they're putting stuff in the shopping cart. So it puts a different kind of spin on the same relationship. And we have a few examples of things like that we've been seeing. So the last year and a half, the most prominent one I think we've seen is the PlayStation 5, right? So supply chain issues, challenges, all that kind of stuff. But what it resulted in was the PlayStation 5, every time there was a new stock drop, we had way more people that wanted it than was available. And it basically created this bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Which that scarcity element to that drove not just the fact that every single PlayStation that got put on the market got purchased, but it also created hype around it. It created a lot of buzz in the media. People were talking about it in communities and things like that. And that started to really drive the value of actually getting one up more. So now when someone gets access to it, it's not just, I got a PlayStation 5. it's like, I got a PlayStation 5 and I had to go through these 5 steps to get
Yeah.
it. And now it's like you earned it almost, and there's some extra value to being able to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has it's a different experience to just walking into a store and then walking back out. And then the other thing that I think we saw a number of people do, Sony did this as well, which is that they also then recognized that, and then they basically, when they had drops, they realized that they were going to have a lot of dedicated attention onto their website or onto a communication channel. So they started collecting people's email addresses through that function, kind of starting that
Community building, yeah.
and that community building through this kind of scarcity event.
Yeah.
Right. So they recognize the scarcity. They say, okay, these are the people that we want to interact with. Now, how can we kind of use this event or use this attention that we're getting in this moment to start the relationship that we want to have with the customers? So
that's super cool to see. So can you talk a little bit more about how is it that retailers can harness scarcity without sacrificing their margins?
Sure. And I think that's an important topic. We've been using this phrase called, like, basically change discounts to drops, or move from discounts to drops. And one, because we think it's a little bit catchy, but also because I think it's easy. It's a little bit easier to discount something. It's a little bit harder to kind of generate hype around something and sell it at full value, right? So if you look at what PlayStation did, that like every PlayStation that got sold didn't get sold at a discount. No. But you still had people lining up to purchase it, right? And that is the ideal. That's the ideal if you're trying to sell something. You want to sell it at the value that you think you deserve for it. And so what we see people doing is switching to these more kind of limited edition product drops and things that are like generate that scarcity, sell it at full price, and then move on to the next kind of product drop or a different variation of it, and things along those lines. And what it does is it allows you to continue to sell a product, but it still allows you to kind of garner attention and do all the things that we just talked about, right? Which is generating hype and PR and trying to get the attention on yourself. And then also, I think most importantly, you're creating those events that boost brand affinity, boost loyalty, and kind of create those long-term relationships. And people can, I think what we'll probably see this year, and especially for Black Friday, is maybe people will be saving some of their larger product drops or their larger events for something like the major holiday season, so they know people are going to be lined up for doing that stuff. And we'll start to see events like this. So also, we showed this a little bit earlier too, but this statistic about 45% of consumers are interested in product drops because they value access to products that are difficult to obtain. Right. So, and I think we're going to continue to see this increase as people do this more and more. But it is that, like, trying to tap into that concept of I want to have access to something that other people don't, and I'm willing to take these steps in order to get access to that. So a couple examples that we've seen, and I think we'll start with kind of some of the more common ones. So the sneaker industry, I think, has been doing this extremely well for a long time, right? So definitely. It's a common example. We work with a lot of people in the sneaker industry because this is like they're a pretty sophisticated version of this tactic, and like you can see, like, there's a ton of different variations of Nike shoes on this slide, right? They've gotten very good at creating either collaborations with celebrities, athletes, etc., and just making small variations of their shoes that have limited releases, and people in that community, of course, want access to the specific things that they're interested in. And some of them have higher values, some of them have huge amount of hype around them, and I think the interest is both valuable for the community because they get something out of it to talk about, to collect, to work on, and then Nike or whoever the shoe product is obviously gets something out of it as well. And of course, they get to sell their shoes, they get visibility, and they get continued kind of brand affinity.
And builds up that loyal customer base as well.
Exactly. So that's one that I think has been around for a while. Maybe more interesting, and part of the reason why we're talking about this is that we've started to see it kind of open up in a lot of other industries too. So luxury goods, right, which is maybe an obvious step for kind of product drops, but Prada is the example on the right side here, and we see this happening in the luxury industry a lot. So they're doing a lot of kind of monthly product drops, and again, it's creating that continued like hype event with their customers to drive that, like, here's this like kind of scarce thing that you can get access to that other people might not have, and that exclusivity play.
Building up their community as well.
Yeah, and then maybe this one on the left is almost more interesting to some extent, which is DoorDash doing kind of exclusive product drops with their product subscriptions. Right?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but DoorDash is a food delivery service based in the US, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think now we're kind of starting to get to a point where we're seeing people do this that are outside of the places where we'd say that, yeah, of course. And now we're saying, really, like that's interesting. So now we started paying a lot more attention to it. And I think we're seeing people be successful with it. And of course, it's all kind of tapping back into how do I create that hype? How do I create that event? How do I create that interaction point with my customer and start that one-to-one relationship? And then the last thing, maybe as another indication of things trending in that direction, is we've also started to see social platforms, Twitter in particular, start to kind of put out and adopt features in the platform that are going to support companies to push out product releases and product drops. And I think it's just another step or another cog in the wheel of like that recognition to say this is the way things are moving, and we know that more and more brands are going to try and kind of do this, and social platforms are a kind of clear place that people are going to gather and collect to interact in a digital space around something like a product drop that they want to talk to the community about.
Yeah, I think it really makes a lot of sense for a platform like Twitter to be involved, because I think, when it comes to product drops and making those kind of announcements, like Twitter is one of the places to be. I think that's where you hear news about drops, and customers can post about their experiences in the product drops. So of course, this makes sense.
Yeah, and it's like Twitter is also like very much in that like recency. This is the thing that happened in the last 2 minutes. Like you should be up to date on it. And it fits really well with what kind of happens in the community there. And I don't know, it's another interesting development for sure.
Definitely. So it's clear to me that you're kind of showing like, we have all these retailers that are getting involved in product drops, and it's becoming really kind of an increasingly competitive landscape. What is it that you think retailers need to really think about in order to make their particular product drops kind of, stand out and create the best experiences for their customers?
Yeah. So to me, the answer to that is that it's all about nurturing a loyal customer base, right? So kind of that's the people that are going to build your community, that are going to kind of refer other people into it.
Yeah.
And it's about developing a relationship with that group, right? So how do you create either member sales, invite-only sales, things that are value add for them, and by doing that and creating that for them, like you then in turn get their loyalty back. And that's what you're trying to do, and you're trying to generate that. So if we look at, I think this is pretty obvious, but 70% of consumers spend more with the brands that they're loyal to, or they're a member of, or they have a subscription program with, right? They have, in some ways, committed to it, right? And they're interested, and they have a little bit, a layer of trust, I guess, with that brand. So if they're going to go somewhere, they go somewhere, they go there first. And people have, the organizations we work with, and we see this with people that we don't work with too, is they've switched a lot to these member sales, invite-only sales, and things that kind of drive value for that group. So if you take a look at kind of why they do that, but it's encouraging and rewarding loyalty, right? And injecting value into the content that you give them and the products that you give them. Hopefully, like as time goes on, personalizing it for them as you kind of
building that relationship.
It's the same thing that you would do if you're building a personal relationship with somebody, right? Like over time, you get to know them better, and you do things for them, they do things for you. That's the reality of what it is, and you try and do that at scale as best you can. And of course, we've even started to see like people start to offer, this is going back to like, of course, people do this with like Amazon Prime and things like that. But of course, beyond that, like people will pay for memberships to get access to something, exclusive deals, whatever the case is. As long as there's value in it for them, they'll engage with you on it. So a few examples of kind of maybe bigger name people that we see doing this, right? So Walmart, again, same thing. They took advantage of this PlayStation shortage. They knew that there was a high demand for it, and they wanted to say, okay, if you're a Walmart Plus shopper, right, you're going to have early access to these PlayStation drops that the people that aren't that won't have, right? So now we're providing a service, we're providing value to them by participating in this program, not just saying, give us your information and good for us, right? Same thing with the Black Friday early access for Target. So again, like how can I create value for somebody that's going to participate in like my program, and then I'm going to kind of by basically creating that value, the value I get back is I get more of their loyalty, I get more of their brand affinity, their opinion of me is more positive.
Right. Cool. So I think you touched on this a bit earlier with Twitter, but it seems really clear that, social media, Twitter, Instagram, other spaces, they're really the platforms to build that hype and let customers and potential customers know about launches, right? What do you say to that?
Yeah, so social media is a clear space that we're going to continue to gather to talk about things like this,
Yeah.
right? So every organization, every company, every brand is going to have platforms that are probably more valuable or less valuable for them, depending on what you're selling, where your community lives, all that kind of stuff. But we need a place to gather to talk about something. Hype doesn't happen in a bubble. It needs a community, it needs a group of people in order for it to kind of take place and grow and build. And so social platforms are where that happens, right? So, and we see people trying to do that in, effectively in a lot of different ways. And some of that, again, is kind of getting back to how do I create the confidence or replicate the idea of being able to see this myself, right? If I can't see this myself or experience this myself, I need someone that I trust and kind of can validate my opinions of it in some ways. And product reviews, try-on hauls, those kind of things on social media platforms are something that we see happen quite a bit. And then, of course, influencers are playing a big role in that. And when done effectively, it can be super valuable. And I think creates it starts to build trust and it starts to build hype around a product when you see someone that you trust using it in a way. This example with eShow is a customer of ours, and I think we've been mentioning a lot of larger brands, but one of the things that is interesting about this, obviously on a little bit more of a smaller scale than some of the other ones that we were talking about, but this is a couple years ago now, they did a shopping event with an influencer in the UK, and they were selling cleaning products.
Yeah.
Right? It happened to be that this influencer had a large set of followers, I think it was about 1 million at the time, that was this is what they were interested in, right? This is what that community was interested in.
They wanted her advice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it drove 54,000 site visits to their site in just under 4 hours. Huge for them, right? That was an important thing. And it also kind of creates this test of we can create this demand by doing this, right? And then once you can start to replicate things like this, then you can start to say, okay, we know that we can generate some hype. Now, how do we start taking that kind of that same tactic, and then what do we do at the next step? Do we try and take advantage of creating that relationship, starting some loyalty process and things like that down the line? And I think these are the kind of things that you start to do leading into Black Friday, or you can start doing on Black Friday, and then it's going to continue to build over time and keep making you more and more successful as you keep doing it.
Yeah, definitely. There is, I think, one thing we need to discuss, though, in all this. It's kind of the elephant in the room, I think. So you can, as a business, you can spend a lot of time, building up a community, creating an amazing product, generating that hype, and having so many really interested shoppers go to your website. But at the end of the day, if your website's not functioning, it's kind of, dare I say, a wasted effort.
Yeah, I mean, so this is essentially, to some extent, this is also why we're talking about this topic, because where we tend to come in this process is this part, right? So we work with a lot of customers that have done the first 4 parts really well, which is also it's nice for us. We get to see people that are very successful at that. But then the challenge, of course, comes at then also making sure that you kind of, when you generate all of that traffic, that you fulfill the experience for the people that you tried to get there.
Yeah, you deliver on the demand.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to think that a website is a magical place that will never crash, but of course is built on infrastructure that needs to be managed and maintained and work properly and all that kind of stuff. And so we see people have a lot of struggles with this, and I think it's challenging, of course, because you put all that effort into it, and then you can kind of fall apart in the last minute. Yeah. This is maybe an example just to kind of highlight how quickly this can happen. This is from a sneaker retailer that we work with, and you can see over the course of about a 30-minute period, that red line on there is essentially like what they load tested to deem to be like their capacity per minute. So they can take 1,500 sessions or users onto their site a minute. And the green line is how many people were inflowing into, well, it was our waiting room, but would be coming into their site, right? So you can see pretty quickly, even about 20, 25 minutes before the sale starts, it's well over their capacity per minute. And by the time the sale is about to start, it's at about 6 times what their capacity is, from instead of 1,500, about
6
9,000.
times their capacity.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so again, that happens in a short period of time. It could be that like you thought it was going to be 1,500 and it turned out to be 9,000. Well, all of those people that just came in now are sitting and staring at a 404 page, and all of the effort you put into it is kind of gone.
It's not the best experience, that's for sure.
And we see it happen more often than you would think. I mean, I think we obviously pay a ton of attention to this because it's the space that we're in. But I mean, we see everything from like, Fortune 500 websites crashing on a relatively regular basis, all the way through small to medium businesses. Everyone has different capacities, bottlenecks, et cetera. And I think the biggest challenge that everyone needs to be aware of is that 1 in 3 customers will leave a brand that they love just because of one bad experience.
Yeah, this statistic for me is just incredibly powerful. Like you can see retailers put a lot of effort into, building up that loyal customer base and planning these kind of product drops, and and having these constantly successful experiences, and but then it's unfortunate that it really just takes one bad experience and it turns off a lot of customers.
Yeah.
All that, loyalty isn't built in a day, essentially.
And it speaks a lot to the competitiveness of it,
Yeah.
but it also is something that, I mean, if you have, like, think of your own personal relationships, like if someone violates your trust, like you have a different opinion of them the next time you interact with them.
That's true. Even after all the good experiences.
Exactly. And it is like, so it's a hard thing to think about, but it is realistic. So and it's something that, you need to always be considering, right? That if someone was super excited that the only thing they wanted this year was this product, right? And they almost got it and the website crashed right before they purchased it or whatever, right? So it has a very kind of hard effect. Yeah. And I think if we look at some of the kind of impacts, like there is, of course, the immediate impacts, right? Like not only is the hype lost and your tech team is scrambling, everyone's trying to fix problems, you're losing all of like this kind of immediate like revenue, but there's also that kind of, to what we were just talking about, that long-term brand damage or relationship damage that happens as a result of it, which I think can a lot of times almost be more costly.
Yeah, down the line.
Even though it's not maybe on the bottom line of your books, it is still a really hard hit. So a couple of things that we always recommend to people is, first off, like, make sure you get the most out of your CDN. I think it's something that we work with a lot. That's one of the things we kind of have started switching towards integrating with quite as often as we can. It's a super valuable tool for making sure that you kind of protect your own infrastructure, your origin server, et cetera, and making sure that you can kind of manage large influxes of traffic as efficiently as possible. I think the other thing that is important to do is identify as many kind of bottlenecks as you can, right? So the bottlenecks can be on your website, your inventory system, anywhere within that process. Like where do you think your most common point or your like kind of most narrow point of failure is? And then how do you load test that? How do you understand it and monitor it and make sure that you know when you're getting close to it? And then just, of course, there's a little bit of a shameless pitch on our side. Like, I mean, we think that a virtual waiting room in that situation, especially if you're kind of going into this like either scarcity and hype tactic, or if you're trying to drive a whole ton of traffic to your site and it's a really important day, like a virtual waiting room helps protect your system, and it also creates like a really nice way for you to interact with your customer during these kind of high intensity, high demand events. So
yeah. Cool. Thank you for sharing. And so, kind of looking at when you generate hype, and I think what a lot of retailers often find is that you clearly draw in a lot of interested customers, and sometimes you might also draw in maybe some bad actors as well in that.
Yeah, that is like it's almost like an unfortunate part of doing this tactic really well. So, because if you create scarcity and you create more demand than there is supply, essentially what you invite is a secondary market, right?
Yeah.
So now there's a reseller market because something that was bought for $100, someone's willing to pay 200 for. So now you have an incentive for people to come in and try and purchase as many of those as possible,
Yeah.
resell them, and then take that margin for profit. And it's something we see happen. So in retail, like we've actually seen it increase over the last couple of years. So especially when like the live ticketing industry and things like that kind of went down a little bit because of COVID, we see a lot of that shift into the product drop space and things along those lines because that's what was still happening. But just in general, we've seen almost over 100% increase in bot traffic year over year. And then I think a pretty significant portion of it is malicious, right? So almost 30%, it could be, and it's always hard to figure out what the exact number is on stuff like this. It probably changes every day. But we know that they're there, and we see it on a regular basis. Every day we come in, we see this happening with
That's
with
for
people.
sure. Yeah.
And it's a huge challenge that you face. And so the cost of it, of course, is that, okay, on the day, like everyone buys, your product sells out, great. But what you eventually do, and especially as your customers feel like start figuring this out, is it starts wearing away at their trust and their understanding of, oh, well, this brand will do a fair release of this and be able to like kind of, I'll have a chance to get this, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that I often think about it is like if I was in line, right, waiting for a store to open, and the store's open at 9 a.m. and I can see through the window like 100 of the products that I was going to get, and there's 100 people in line. I'm like, great, I'm going to get it. And then the doors open, and immediately everything just disappears, right? And people can tell and feel and know when that's happening. And it hurts your brand, and it hurts that trust with the loyal customers that you're trying to basically have that kind of long-term relationship with.
Doesn't feel particularly fair as a customer either.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that this bot problem can also kind of cause problems with the previous issue as well, right? So if you have a huge influx of bot traffic into your site, it can also crash your site, right? So if you have that challenge, of course, now not only were bots going to potentially steal a lot of your inventory, but also they crash your site, so the people that were potentially going to get to buy it now can't even access your site. So there's kind of a long-term or like a domino effect of this one. And one of the things that we, in particular, pay a lot of attention to at Qit is it's not just about can I sell my product, but it's can I sell my product in a fair way, right? So as soon as you introduce scarcity into a situation, it creates a really interesting challenge of how do I get this limited amount of product to the people in a fair way? Because by definition, some people are not going to get it, right?
Yeah.
But it should be that you still get that out to people in a way that like feels like everyone had a fair and good experience, and they come away from it feeling like they had a shot to get it. And what we see is that fairness, or that perception of fairness, right, leads to that trust, satisfaction, and loyalty, and ultimately what leads to long-term sales and revenue for the company. And the people that we see do this really well and take that very seriously, those are the people that we see successful over a long period of time. And I think this is a pretty interesting stat, but the customer perception of fairness accounts for 80% of trust and 56% of loyalty. So a huge portion of whether someone trusts and is loyal to a brand or an organization or a company is based on their perception of whether the way that they handle things is fair, right? And these major events are like kind of a huge touch point, especially when there are these kind of hyped items that are important for that.
Yeah, it's a powerful way to show that you are providing a fair experience.
Exactly. So we do have a few pointers for this before we wrap up here, which is I think this of course starts with identifying and monitoring. Right. So you don't know there's a problem until you know there's a problem. Right. So
goes without saying.
and it sounds kind of silly, but this is something that people need to be doing, especially as they start kind of adopting tactics like this, or if they're into it, it's an important piece of it. And then of course acting on suspicious traffic, which can kind of happen in a couple ways. And so sometimes it can actually be, even once you identify an issue, it can be harder to act on it than you may think. But of course, there's filtering bots in your web traffic management and making sure that you kind of prevent things up front, right? So how do I prevent malicious actors from getting into my website, into my shopping cart and taking stuff? And then there's kind of the after sale or the after like part of things where you can set time aside to say, let's make sure that we audit where our purchases came from, how that worked, did it look like human behavior? How can we make sure that like this kind of went as we expected it to? And I think by taking those measures, you start really having a positive impact on that kind of fairness factor and that transparency around how the sales happen. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
So I think you've gone through a lot of really interesting information and stats, and there's definitely a lot to take away. But how would you quickly summarize this, what we've been through today?
I'll do it. I'll try to do it in 60 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I time you?
Well, we'll try. Okay. So I think the main takeaway here is that, right, e-commerce is continuing to play a bigger role in Black Friday and in the holiday season in general, and we're also seeing it expand more and more over time. And then I think we're seeing indications that there's going to be relatively lower consumer confidence this year than we've had previous years. And then what we've seen be successful, both with kind of the customers that we work with, also outside of that, just as we're paying attention to the space, is that people are starting to really tap more and more into the scarcity and to the hype. And they're trying to do that more by shifting to product drops, collaborations, things like that, as opposed to doing it with discounts, right? And I think taking advantage of that with driving value for your community with member-only sales, invite sales, things like that, through social communities. And then I think of course, the big caution as we go into all of that stuff is to make sure that you pay attention to your infrastructure, deliver on the day that you need to deliver on, and make sure that everything is ready for that. And then, of course, constantly be understanding that potentially there are malicious users or people that are kind of eroding at that strategy by trying to get in there with bots and try and resell your product or erode at that brand trust by doing it that way.
Yeah, you got to ensure you create a fair experience.
Yeah. Was that 60 seconds?
You know what? I think you were right in the ballpark there. All right, so now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our presentation. So if you have any questions they haven't added, please do that now. One thing that I have actually as a question. So, you know, we talk about a lot of the positive aspects of using scarcity as a marketing strategy. Are there any maybe challenges that retailers need to be aware of?
Sure. So, I mean, I think in some ways the two last points in the discussion, so the challenges with infrastructure, the challenges with bots, I think as you adopt a scarcity model more, you in some ways invite those challenges a bit more as well. Right. So, and it's not to say that it's necessarily a negative, but it does introduce a little bit more complication in that sense. And then the other thing I would say about it is a little bit more of a longer term tactic, right? So it does take a little bit of time to try and build up hype and a community around something that you're trying to create that kind of hype around. So it's not something that maybe you can just like immediately be successful at tomorrow. Hopefully, maybe you can, but like I think it is something that does require like repetition and trying to really move into it. But I think long term, the value is there, right? So I think that if it's something that you think could work for your organization, I think there is a lot of value in committing to it and trying to find a way to make that work.
Now here's another question. What would you recommend to retailers whose customers are particularly price sensitive?
So I think that it depends on the product that you're trying to sell, right? So I think part of the kind of value of this strategy is that it actually gets people a little bit out of that price sensitive mode, right? So you're coming for a different reason, right? So when you get caught in a kind of, for lack of a better word, just like a discount back and forth with one of your competitors, it kind of encourages people to only paying attention to price, right? So I think the challenge, of course, is that if you can't create scarcity, right, in some way, I think we try and create scarcity with discounts. So it's about identifying where you can create that scarcity uniquely for your organization, and that's where you try and attract people in.
Yeah.
And I think the examples you saw with Walmart and with Target and like the stuff earlier, so they found that they were trying to find those opportunities with those deals that they were doing, and then of course the assumption is that once they have that established connection with with your brand, they're more likely to then also purchase the more maybe price sensitive items from you as well, right? So it's about identifying and then trying to find out how to execute on that tactic in that way, right? So, and it, like I said, it's not always like a clear cut, like, oh, it's obvious what we should try and do. So it does take, it's going to be unique to each business.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Now, are there any ways that that retailers could use Qt without missing out on Google Analytics data, potentially?
Yeah. Yeah, we actually, I mean, that is more of a technical question, but we do deal with that quite a bit, right? So we can kind of basically more or less use like a referral exclusion essentially in analytics to pass, to continue to pass the information straight through. So it basically, analytics would more or less treat the waiting room page, which goes onto our domain as part of the site, and it would, and as it gets passed in, would retain the referral information. So that would work. And we have done that a number of times, and it does of course depend on your integration, your setup, etc. So it's not like so simple that I can just give a blanket answer to that, but we can do that.
Nice, that's good to know.
Yep.
And I think maybe just one last question. So, you know, we've seen quite a few examples of big retailers, Walmart, Target, using scarcity marketing strategy, but is this something that would also work for smaller retailers as well?
Yeah. I mean, so it can work for anybody, right? So I think it's not about big or small. It is a little bit more about kind of identifying the opportunity that you have, right? So I think the easiest, maybe the easiest or the lowest barrier to entry for the tactic is someone that's more of a D2C brand, like that they're kind of producing and selling to the customer. But of course, for any distributors or people that are selling other products and things like that, it is about just trying to find the things that you can create that have that draw. I think one of the interesting ones, just because it's a little bit, they're obviously not small, but like Lidl had like a limited edition sneaker release, right? Which is like Lidl is a grocery store.
Right, yeah.
Right. And it was not an expensive sneaker, but for whatever reason, like this, like it caught on in the community and people were really interested in it, and there were lines out the door to go into Lidl. Like,
to be fair, it looked really cool.
But it is just to say that like sometimes it is thinking a little bit outside the box and trying to figure out what's the thing that we can do that we haven't seen other people do, and how can we like kind of generate a little bit of a groundswell around it. And I don't think you should shy away from the tactic if you're smaller, right? I think in some ways maybe you have an opportunity to take bigger risks or try things that are a little bit more zany that maybe you can get that traction that other larger companies wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, well said. All right, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Pat, thank you so much for going through all this information with us today.
Thank you, and I hope everyone enjoyed.
Yeah, well, wherever you're joining us, whether you're in Sydney or Salt Lake City, I hope you got some information that you can take away for your next product drop or holiday season sale. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, take care and enjoy the rest of your day.